God Save America. Kyle Kulinski is saying it's shocking that Pod Save America got Ukraine right. And I have to say something just initially about this is that I don't listen to Pod Save America. So, you know, look, I'm not going to judge anyone for listening to Pod Save America, but it is some of the most just cringy, neoliberal, just absolute trash that it's hard for me to believe that it's listenable. And even just listening to the clips with AOC and Obama, I'm like, how can people listen to this with in any length? So let's see what he has to say here about Pod Save America's position, and then I'll make comments as we go along. So it starts about 122. Let's get started.
The Pod Save America crew. Now, these are normally not my people. How would I describe Pod Save? Pod Save, so they all used to work for Obama, and I would say they're not sufficiently critical of the Democrats. I don't even know if they make the distinction that there used to be New Deal Democrats who were more in favor of social democracy, and that now the dominant strain in the Democratic Party is what we would call neoliberal Democrats, corporate Democrats. I don't even know if they make that distinction, but insofar as they do, they lean more on the side of being pro-centrism, corporatism, neoliberalism, and of course, I think that's been the death knell of the Democratic Party. I think that it's a vapid, dead ideology. It concedes far too much to Ronald Reagan and the conservatives. But shockingly, I guess every now and then they have a little flash of like, hey, maybe there's some humanity and pragmatism and reason in there. And they definitely surprised me with this one because they end up critiquing the Congressional Progressive Caucus for that incredibly weaselly move they did, which is released a letter with 30 of them signing it saying, hey, we're pro-Ukraine, but also let's do negotiation and diplomacy to avoid nuclear war, and then retracting that letter. Here are the Pod Save America bros basically saying, bad idea, shouldn't have retracted that letter. Let's watch.
So before we watch what Pod Save America had to say, all of those kind of reservations and caveats about Pod Save America, I mean, it just makes me think that, on the one hand, it's not a bad thing to listen to comment on when neoliberals get it right. But what you'll see here is that they don't actually get it right, and Kyle Kulinski actually doesn't get it right either. So that's the big problem here, is that you have a flanking here, not to facts and truth, but to what I think is, and he called it weaselly, right? He said it was a weaselly move by the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I don't think it was weaselly at all. I think it showed how absolutely committed to endless war the Democratic Party is, and how absolutely committed the Democratic Party is to NATO, and to the fact that whenever NATO's masters, NATO's corporate masters, whenever NATO as the de facto masters of the Democratic Party say, you can't say what you say, you can't have this letter, you can't push us toward diplomacy, then they'll just do it. I don't think that's weaselly. I think that's absolutely exposing who and what these Democratic Party politicians, no matter if they call themselves progressive or neoliberal, are committed to. And so here is now what they had to say. And I think in Kyle's commentary only makes it worse. So let's watch.
You make the right point that what Biden's saying is, I won't negotiate around the settlement that Ukraine has to accept without them. That doesn't mean we don't have things to talk to the Russians about. It just means Biden's not going to sit there and say, well, maybe you can keep this part of Ukraine and not that part of Ukraine. That's not going to happen. But to your point, if you don't create any space for kind of debate in the center here around this policy, you know where all the concerns about the war are going to go? They're going to go to where Kevin McCarthy took it, right? Totally. Which is like, hey, I'm getting uncomfortable here. There's nuclear threats. let's cut off the Ukrainians, right?
It's a lot of money.
So,
Yep.
to some of you, like some of the Ukraine stands on Twitter or whatever, who like just, pile on this stuff, you might be creating the outcome you don't want, because by punishing anybody who says, let's have diplomacy, the only alternative to your position, is where Kevin McCarthy's going, which is like, hey, let's cut these, where Tucker Carlson is, basically.
Or Elon Musk. I mean, there's clearly a void of people.
There's a void of,
and like
discussion.
Elon Musk is filling it, or that guy David Sachs, some like idiot tech investor, right-wing goober is filling it. It's like, why don't we have the CPC, the Congress, the progressive in the House fill it?
Yeah.
So what's hilarious about this is that in the beginning, what the other, I don't know their names, the other guy in the Pod Save America crew, what he's saying is, oh yeah, we want the most like limited form of diplomacy. We need to just talk to them about some things. But he already put out cookie cutter what is off the table. Oh, we're not talking about the territory, those referendums, all of that. That's all nonsense. What Russia has declared as theirs is nonsense. We're not going to negotiate with them on that. We're not going to negotiate with them on the weapons or anything like that, but you should be able to talk to them. So already we're talking about the most limited. We're starting at the lowest possible denominator here on what's acceptable. And then it gets into partisanship, making this about partisanship. Like, this isn't impressive to me already off the bat. You're making diplomacy about partisanship. Oh, why can't the Congressional Progressive Caucus fill that void, right? Because that void is being filled by Kevin McCarthy, by Tucker Carlson. Well, duh, it's being filled by them because they are looking at their electoral prospects. They're looking at what it means for them that the Democratic Party is mired in a proxy war, a NATO-led proxy war, completely committed to it and at the helm. And they're the ones who have to suffer the consequences, the blame for the economics that come out of this, the economic crisis that comes out of this, and also the potential military conflict. So, of course, why wouldn't the GOP and people like Tucker Carlson, why wouldn't they go after that low-hanging fruit? But that is to say, to ask the question almost naively, why can't the Congressional Progressive Caucus fill that void? Look at what they just did. Why don't you try to seek truth from facts? That's the whole theme for me here. They're not seeking truth from facts, but apparently Kulinski is very impressed by this. So let's hear what he has to say.
Yeah,
or at least try.
Well, that would be a very healthy place to fill it.
So now I should also add, they spoke to Obama recently on their show. I think we covered one of the segments from it, probably one of the things that Obama said that I didn't like. But he also echoed this sentiment. And Obama's policy vis-a-vis Russia was a lot more on the side of negotiation, diplomacy, let's reduce tensions. The Cold War is over. There was that very famous moment between Mitt Romney and Obama back in the 2012 debate where Obama said to Romney, hey, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back. And certainly Russia has been more hawkish, bellicose, and imperialist than was predicted, but that doesn't mean you cannot talk and try to avert a worst case scenario, because those are the stakes when we talk about what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. So their point is, hey, look, if you leave this position, this lane wide open for people like Kevin McCarthy and Marjorie Taylor Greene to take this position, then they're effectively outflanking you on your left. But they're not really doing that for this specific reason. All of the rhetoric that I've seen come from them is cut off the weapons to Ukraine. Full stop. That's where they ended. Like, okay, we're not gonna do a blank check to Ukraine. Okay, look, I agree with that position, right? But what's missing from their position? They're not saying anything about negotiation and diplomacy. They just want to cut off the weapons to Ukraine, which means it's only a matter of time until Russia takes over all of Ukraine.
So there it is. There it is. I mean, we'll continue, but the point here is that he's already talking about Russia being bellicose, being imperialist, and that the worst thing about this is not that the Republicans are being opportunistic. And you could talk about whether that's true or not. I believe that that's true. I mean, this is what both parties do when the other is engaged, or at least at the helm of, because both political parties have supported this proxy war, have supported NATO, have funneled all of these resources into using Ukraine as a pawn against Russia. That's a bipartisan policy. There really is no conflict. The conflict is in the partisanship in the midterm elections, of course. But the problem for Kyle Kulinski here is not that the proxy war is being dangerously escalated. He has a caveat. I'm against the weapons too, but Russia is imperialist. It's bellicose. And guess what? The Republicans aren't doing enough. They're not saying we want diplomacy too. And so that actually is the big problem. No, the big problem here is that just the language. Think about what diplomacy means. Diplomacy doesn't mean that you criticize and condemn in a public forums everything about your so-called diplomatic counterpart, right? Diplomacy is you don't go in saying, Russia, you're imperialist, you're bellicose, and we have reason to believe you're going to take over all of Ukraine. All of those talking points literally lead to the opposite of diplomacy, right? It shows a lack of understanding, a lack of a desire to actually cooperate and communicate. And while Kyle Kulinski is a YouTuber with 970, almost 1 million subscribers, while he isn't at the helm in Pod Save America, despite all of the money that they have and their soft pedaling and hard pedaling corporate Democratic Party-led neoliberalism, despite their prominence in the podcast world, they also aren't in the rooms. But that is to say, what you communicate to the public has a huge influence on diplomacy, right? What we say to the public, how we convince people of our positions matters to what ends up happening in that realm. Because now we have a situation where more than 3/4, and we're going to get into this later, of people have negative views on Russia. What political basis does the Democratic Party have? What base of pressure do they face to actually engage in diplomacy correctly? Absolutely zero. And Kyle Kulinski is making it worse. Russia is imperialist. Russia is bellicose. Russia's just going to take over Ukraine. What evidence is there of that? There's absolutely no evidence of that. These referendums that happened, in Donetsk, in Lugansk, in Zaporozhye, right? These referendums, they were in the works for like 7 years now, and Russia didn't support them, right? Russia didn't support their right to self-determination and independence. It's just because how things have escalated, NATO's provocations, how they've escalated, that Russia has now supported them. And guess what? They happened 6 months, right? Check my fake watch here. 6 months after the special military operation. So I don't want to hear about, Russia's going to take over all of Ukraine. How many more NATO provocations are there going to be before Russia feels like it has to be in an all-out siege and war on Ukraine? I mean, that's what is happening right now. This is no longer just a special military operation. And the reason for that is NATO. So why not just say, we need to stop all the weapons. We need diplomacy, and we need real diplomacy, not one that goes into any kind of talks with talking points like the ones that Kyle Kulinski is promoting here. I mean, I think that should be at the top of how we look at this, right? How we actually look at this and what we need to say about diplomacy. I think that's why this is so problematic, but it only gets worse from here. So let's continue.
At the very least, certainly the eastern portion of Ukraine. So the real position that I think is the correct position for the lefties to take is peace deal is paramount. That comes first and foremost. That's the most important thing. And then also you can reduce or eliminate the weapons to Ukraine. I told you guys from the very beginning, I was definitely in favor of the first few packages of weapons to Ukraine and support to Ukraine for the very simple reason that this was an illegal and offensive imperialist invasion by Russia against Ukraine.
Even if you want to concede, which I won't, I don't believe it was an imperialist invasion. Sure, if you look at the UN Charter, it was illegal. But guess what happens to the UN Charter when you have a hegemonic imperialist power, the United States, and its NATO junior partners, right? When you have that, what happens to the UN Charter? What has happened to it? It's been eviscerated. It has been shredded. It has been up in flames. So the very idea, right? Let's even if we were to concede that this was an illegal invasion, I won't concede the imperialist part because I think that is just a complete misunderstanding of the word. But let's just concede, oh, it was illegal. Well, do you oppose imperialist illegal invasions with more imperialist illegal invasions? Because there's nothing at all legal about what the United States and NATO have done. Nothing at all legal. Ukraine is not a NATO member, so it has none of the so-called rights even within their jurisdiction. None of them. No Article 5, no nothing. No nuclear sharing, none of that. And all of that is illegal under the UN Charter because NATO is a defunct and obsolete institution in and of itself. So even if we were to concede that that this was an illegal move by Russia, right? Despite the fact that everything that happened up until that point, which brought Russia to the brink and pushed them into conducting this military operation, even if we were to concede all of that, do you then respond with more imperialism? Because I don't remember the time when giving weapons to another country. I don't remember a time when the United States had did that where it was liberating or where it actually fought oppression, right? The United States is not one to support armed liberation movements or to support national liberation movements or to support anti-imperialist forces anywhere. The United States has done the opposite over and over and over again. I can't even name all of the instances, but there have been more than 50, 70, 80, 100. We could go on and on just in the last century alone of the United States meddling in other countries, providing arms to certain groups, certain factions. In Indonesia, right, in the 1960s, what did the United States do? It armed a fascistic proxy war that massacred 1 million communists. 1 million. So I don't want to hear that you supported the first. I mean, that just delegitimizes your whole point. I supported the first packages of arms. So you supported the tens of billions of dollars that was going into private military contractors to so-called defend Ukraine. NATO wasn't defending Ukraine. NATO was using Ukraine as a pawn to get to Russia, to weaken Russia. We already have evidence of that. Lloyd Austin's already said as much. Joe Biden has already said as much. Joe Biden has said we can't have Vladimir Putin in power. They've already said this. This has been a conversation for 3 decades. NATO expansion. You had William Burns. He's the head of the CIA now. He used to be the ambassador to Russia. He said, this is a bad idea, guys. We shouldn't be encroaching on Russia's border. We shouldn't be considering NATO expansion. And what did they do? What did the U.S. do? It expanded NATO. The exact thing that William Burns was saying happened. So you supported that? Because if you support arms to Ukraine, then you support that. And that's not even to get into the NAZIs, the fascists, the far-right nationalists that receive these arms, the CIA getting their hand on them, a lot of them going to the black market. A lot of them aren't even going to be built in many years. So you supported that because it defends Ukraine. It absolutely just shows that you were just I don't know if I can call you a victim. You were taken by the propaganda, taken by it, because there's just no justification for it. Let's continue.
And so they deserve a right to have a fighting chance to protect their country. Now, where I differ, of course, is that doesn't mean a blank check. That doesn't mean, 16 packages later or whatever it is, $80 billion later, that, it's now heresy and pro-Putin to say, hey, let's cut the weapons off. No, I disagree with that. But again, I think the most important point to stress is I don't agree with the Tucker Carlson position or the Marjorie Taylor Greene position or the Kevin McCarthy position of just cut off weapons. No, it is peace deal and cut off weapons. Peace deal is the most important part. So again, the position of the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the letter that they took back was, let's make sure we do negotiation and diplomacy to try to find a way out of this. That's what they were saying. And by the way, they were super clear in that. They don't fully agree with me because their position in that letter was like, we'll give Ukraine anything and everything they want in terms of weapons, but also let's talk. No, I think the correct position is honestly to marry the far right position, the Tucker Carlson position, effectively with the Congressional Progressive Caucus position of negotiation, diplomacy, and let's cut off the weapons to try to de-escalate, avert this, find a way out. And look, it is.
If that was his only position, then we'd be fine here. If that was his only position, that probably should be his only position. If you don't know more about the intricacies and developments that's going on the ground in Russia, going on the ground in the region, in Ukraine, etc., if you don't understand the forces at play, the balance of forces, then perhaps you should just advocate for diplomacy and a reduction, if not an eradication, an abolishment of military aid to Ukraine. That would be perfectly fine. I would have absolutely no problem with that. I think that probably a lot of people in the hardcore Bernie Sanders camp kind of fall in that position, right? They're not geopolitical analysts. Most of them aren't anti-imperialists. Most of them aren't studying world politics. They're getting a lot of their information from the same places that neoliberal Democrats feed them, right? So, I mean, I'd be okay with it, but it's not. It's always colored and peppered. This is why the Western quote unquote left, I call them the cruise missile leftists, are so problematic in that they will completely sully any good that they say with the very same talking points of their imperialist masters. That's what they do. They talk through the mouth, they act as mouthpieces. They talk through the kind of ideological sphere of the very forces that they say that they're opposing. I think how Kulinski would say, and he said in this video, that he's opposed to the neoliberals. He's opposed to a war. He wants to see de-escalation. Then why are you promoting this false narrative that is fueling this lie, that is fueling the war in the first place? Because it's the constant and incessant new Cold War propaganda that says Russia's imperialist, Russia is bellicose, Russia's aggressive, Russia's big and bad. Russia's the worst. Russia's the problem. Russia's escalating nuclear conflict. Russia. It's that which has gotten us here. It's that which has shaped public opinion, which has allowed the military-industrial complex, which has allowed Wall Street, which has allowed their servants in Washington to pursue what could be one of the final chips in a violent and deadly nuclear conflict. I mean, that's where this is headed. That's the direction it's going in. Even if it's a lot more complex than saying we're definitely headed there, that is where we are leaning toward. That is where the dice is being rolled in. That's where all of the moves are leading. And it's because there isn't a lot of strength behind this. There isn't where is the strength? Where is the power behind a message that says, well, we should have diplomacy. We should reduce the weapons. Oh, yeah, guess what? I also agree with all of the talking points, if not most of them, which has led to the weapons and the weapons going to Ukraine and the diplomacy from being absolutely cut off, right? It's led to diplomacy being cut off and Ukraine being militarized to the point where Russia sees it as an existential threat. I mean, that's what's happening here. It's a complete and utter, it's a contradiction, but what it really is it's absolute hypocrisy. So let's continue. Let's finish this.
It's very possible that if you do that, you can get some sort of a settlement that's bare minimum agreeable to both sides. And the world ends up much better as a result of it. That's very possible. But now it's also possible the opposite happens, and you make this peace agreement, and then Putin signs it, agrees to it, and then effectively ignores it and keeps taking more territory. And if that were to happen, then everybody who is screaming, oh my God, you're Neville Chamberlain, they were correct. But that's yet to be seen whether or not that is true. And by the way, even if that does turn out to be true, that oh, we were Neville Chamberlain and we should have never negotiated in the first place, we should have never made a peace deal in the first place, well, then at least, the people who advocated for a peace agreement bought us into the 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it may be, before World War III. Because make no mistake about it, these are the consequences of that, right? Like if he goes back on an agreement and takes more territory, then I don't think there's going to be any way to stop the U.S. and Russia from escalating to a point of absolute crisis where we're talking about cataclysmic, apocalyptic, civilization-ending type events. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but it's really not when you're talking about, a World War III where now we're in the nuclear age.
So, again, it's all Russia. It's all Russia is to blame. Russia is perhaps pondering if there's to be diplomacy, then perhaps Putin will walk it back, right? It's all of this obsession with Russia being not just an adversary, but completely devoid of any capacity for staying true to its agreements. Now, what's hilarious about this is it completely negates the actual events that have transpired in this proxy war, in this NATO-led proxy war, because it was early December of 2021 where Vladimir Putin was saying, let's come to an agreement. Here is what we have to say about why we're concerned. Here is our security interests. Here are the things that we see as possible points of not just negotiation, but where we see on our side as kind of untouchable, unquestionable, and unalienable issues that must be respected, right? These are our security concerns. That happened. And what did the US do? And then what did NATO do? Both of them said, go F yourself. We're not going to talk to you. This is absolutely ridiculous. You're asking us to stand down against you? We would never do that. We would never talk to you. So this all started because the United States refused to engage in any kind of diplomatic action. That's really the truth of the matter here. But yet we have Kyle Kulinski, he went off for almost a minute there, if not more than that, talking about Russia might violate this, Russia might violate that. But hey, you should still try to engage in diplomacy. You should, you should try. But, at the end of the day, if Putin wants to start World War III, he'll start World War III. All of the developments that have transpired show that the United States has brought the world to a World War III situation. Where is the analysis of the new Cold War? Where is the analysis of what the United States has been doing toward Russia, its policy toward Russia, not just in the last 7-8 months, but how about its overall policy over the last decade? Its policy over the last decade has been military encirclement, economic sanctions, propaganda war. Sound familiar? Because the same thing is happening toward China. So that has been the policy of the United States and NATO toward Russia. And that's not even to include all of the countries, this former Soviet republics that were given NATO membership before that, within the last 15 years. So NATO has expanded. Russia's been militarily encircled. The INF treaty has been ripped up by the United States. There has been a complete collapse of diplomatic communication between Russia and the United States to the level of where now it's only on emergency situations. It's only when the United States feels, we have to make a call because this is getting a little intense. It's only at the most emergency levels where these communications are happening. I mean, that's very concerning. But here, Kyle Kulinski is placing all of the energy, all of the pontification onto Russia, when in fact we already know what side is actually escalating toward World War III. We know which side it is. It's the United States. It's NATO. They have no right to be doing what they're doing in Eastern Europe along Russia's border. They have no right to be in Ukraine at all. They don't. There's nothing in international law that says they do. Defending a president. No, they don't have no UN mandate. I didn't see the UN Security Council vote in affirmative toward this. The United States believes itself as international law, and Kyle Kulinski is reinforcing that kind of American exceptionalist hubris and imperialism here by saying it's Putin, it's Putin, it's Putin. That's a huge component of this ideological propaganda war called American exceptionalism. To believe that Putin, Russia is actually what the problem is here, when in fact the United States is the one that's escalating. This is the real problem here. But somehow most of this video has been about Russia.